listening to the Animation Addicts Podcast, episode 357, interview with Nick Spake, author of Bright and Shiny, A History of Animation at Award Shows. Welcome to the Animation Addicts Podcast with the Rotoscopers, the number one place to get your animation fix with animation addicts just like you. Each episode, we dive into the wonderful world of animation featuring Disney, DreamWorks, Pixar, and everything in between. From hilarious discussions and movie reviews to interviews with industry insiders, this show's mission is to brighten your day through our love of animation. So hop on your nerdy couch, grab some snacks, and get ready to hang out with your animation besties because it's time to dive into today's episode. Hey there, Animation Addicts. I'm your host, Morgan Stradling. I am back with another episode of the Animation Addicts Podcast for you. Today, I have a really fun interview. We are talking about animation history. There is a new book out. It's called Bright and Shiny, A History of Animation at Award Shows. And there are volumes 1 and 2 available right now, and volume 3 is coming out shortly. The author is Nick Spake, and he's a film critic that I actually know in person from the Phoenix Film Critic Circle. So I've known that this book was in the works for quite a while, and I'm really excited that it is finally here. So I got together with Nick to talk about his new books and to talk about animation history. It's really great because this book not only talks about the Academy, which is probably the biggest award show that people think of when it comes to movies, but it also covers TV with the Emmys and the Annie Awards. And so if you are curious about how animation has done at all of these various award shows over the years, this is a comprehensive guide for you. So with that, let's jump into the interview. All right, we are here with Nick Spake. He's the author of Bright and Shiny, A History of Animation at Award Shows, volumes 1, 2, and soon to be 3. So Nick, welcome to the show.
Hi, Morgan. Thank you so much for having me on today.
I'm excited. So we go way back. We've been in the Phoenix Critics circuit for a while, and we see each other at screenings. So when I heard that you were coming out with this book long time ago, I was very excited because I think this is something that is definitely needed and overdue. So before we get into that, introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about you and what sparked your love for animation.
Yeah, well, I've been a film critic here in the Phoenix area since I was in college, really. That's when I first started writing professionally. And I just started doing it for the local Arizona state paper. And that's how I got into contact with a lot of people, just going to screenings. And then I thought, maybe I could make a career out of this. So I've mainly been writing for other entertainment outlets, mainly Watch Mojo and Miss Mojo. And in between that time, I kind of got this idea. 2 of my major passions are animation and award shows, but I had never really seen a deep dive into both of them at the same time, at least in any book form. There are plenty of books about animation that will mention awards in passing. There are plenty of Oscar books that will mention animation in passing, but none that really do a deep dive. And to an extent, it makes why. Animation, it gets the short end of the stick at award shows. But the more research I did into this project, I found that there was a lot more to discuss, not just in terms of the awards, but also the backstories about how about a lot of these shorts and films and shows were made, and some of the interesting stories that the makers had on the award circuit, as they either got nominated or in some cases didn't get nominated.
Yeah, that's one of the things I loved about the book is that it's so in-depth. I've read, I have here in my bookshelves countless, animation. There's like art books, there's history books about animation, and there's so many out there. And like you said, this is one that just really wasn't covered very well. But I love that it is so detailed. It's so thorough. Like this is a resource for anyone who has any question about any movie. You can just flip to the index, find it, and you're not just going to get a brief one-line sentence about it. You're going to get full pages dedicated to that. So talk about, because when we were talking initially, it was just assumed that it was going to be one book, but it is now soon to be 3 volumes. So talk about the process of writing it and how you ultimately came to expanding it to multiple volumes.
Yeah, when I first told you about it, I also thought it was going to be 3 books, but it all started when, at first I thought, well, maybe I'll mainly just talk about the Oscars. Then I thought, well, why stop there? I could also talk about the Emmys. I could talk about the Annie Awards, which are just for animation. And I guess I can also talk about all the other award shows in between there. Maybe not as in depth as those three, but I will try to cover them all as much as I can. And the more research I did into that, I started interviewing more people. And the more interviews I did, the more material I got there. And it got to the point where this entire manuscript was almost 2 Bibles long. And I thought to myself, okay, this is either going to have to be multiple volumes, or I'm going to have to find a way to condense it all. But that'll also mean losing a lot of great material. And fortunately, my publisher, Bear Manor Media, they specialize in not only entertainment books, but also books that are often done in multiple volumes. So they were open into doing it into a multi-volume set. And that's how it ended up being 3 volumes. And the same thing happened with The Lord of the Rings when Tolkien wrote that. He wrote it as 1 tome, and then they decided to split into 3 books. So you could call this The Lord of the Rings of Animation at Award Shows books.
I love it. I definitely remember for years, I'd see you and I just remember animation at the Academy. I think that was kind of just like the little tagline for what you're doing. And then it broadened and ultimately was animation at the award shows. So where did you ultimately have to stop, right? Because you could just keep going on and on as you're researching this and you're compiling it. Like, how's your editing process? Where did you kind of draw those lines?
Well, with the first volume, I ended around the same time that The Lion King came out, which seemed like a good place because it was right after Beauty and the Beast had got nominated, which some people thought might open the door for more animated films to be nominated for Best Picture. But after The Lion King didn't get nominated, that was kind of a sign that it wasn't going to happen again anytime soon. And Volume 2 picks up more with the Emmys, but it also picks up with more animation, breaking new ground like the original Toy Story, going all the way to when WALL-E came out. And a lot of people thought WALL-E would be the film to finally break through and get another Best Picture nomination, but it didn't happen. And then Volume 3 is picking up when Up came out, and that did finally get a Best Picture nomination, but only after they extended the race. And that goes all the way to the most recent race where Flow won Best Animated Feature, which is also another significant turning point. Although originally that wasn't going to be where it ended, because at one point when Soul came out, I thought to myself, okay, that could be a good place to end it. Then I was still writing it. Then Pinocchio came out. I said, okay, this would be a natural point to end things. But it just kept getting pushed back and back. And finally, after I had signed with Bear Manor, I was all like, okay, this is it. I'm done. But then Flo won, and I thought to myself, okay, I can expand upon the epilogue a little longer just to add a little bit about that. But the way we're going, we should get Volume 3 out before this next Oscar race, but it'd be very interesting to write another chapter about K-pop demon hunters, let's just say.
There's always something else, right? Something that changes the game, changes the landscape.
Yeah, so maybe at some point I'll have to write Volume 4, but I would probably wait a few years to do that.
Absolutely. So how did your role as a film critic over the years help you in writing this and into your perspective as you were covering each one of these different films and awards?
Yeah. Well, a bit of my own opinion is naturally in the book, and that's mainly evident in the very first chapter, the prologue, where I give my 2 cents about animation award shows and why the Oscars don't always see eye to eye. I do try to take a more non-biased opinion with recounting history because I'm trying to sing it through the eyes of various others, although I still incorporate a lot of my own opinion in there, but I do try to leave that at the front door, whereas with a critical review, it's all my opinion. Like, when I write a review for something, it's purely mine. I will try to acknowledge that it may appeal to others. It's just not necessarily going to appeal to me. But I do think that film criticism has helped me as a writer and just form a voice that's my own.
Yeah, I did notice that as I was reading through, you did try to take the personal out of it. Like, this is just a history. We're going to see both sides of, for certain things that may be more controversial, but it's not here for Nick to just, go this way or that way about a film. So I appreciated that because I could just go and just see, okay, what was it? And then go from there as far as taking your own opinions on it. So with this, you got to interview over 200 professionals in the animation industry. Can you talk about the process of interviewing each one of those and maybe some interesting tidbits that you learned from some key figures?
Yeah. Well, at first I thought maybe I'll get 3 animation historians to interview, and that will be enough. But then I thought, well, what if I could get in touch with some of the directors or writers or just animators who worked on some of these films? and shows. And to my surprise, a lot of them were on board. I started off pretty simply, just reaching out to the ones I could through Facebook. You'd be surprised by how many people you can still get through just through social media. And then I would also use Rocket Reach to see if I could get emails specific to people, and also Internet Movie Database Pro, sometimes getting in touch with agents. And I figured by the time I got Alan Menken and Steven Schwartz to talk to me for about an hour, I was all like, okay, if I could get them, who knows who else I can get. And for the most part, I got almost everyone I wanted. There were a few that were holdouts that never quite got on board, but I was surprised to find just how many got on board. But this was also part of the reason why it took so long to do, because even though these people were willing to talk, their schedules aren't always wide open. And when I do finally talk to someone, it'll make me go back and say, okay, I should rewrite all of this, or try to work this out to work this quote in, stuff like that.
Yeah. Did you have a white whale of someone that you were really, really hoping to get that you either did or did not get for the interviews?
Yeah, there were plenty of people I would have liked to get. Like, I tried to get Jeffrey Katzenberg to come on and talk about it.
He's notorious for just not talking.
Yeah. Although I did manage to talk to his assistant, which is still closer than I think a lot of people ever got.
That's awesome. So what are some highlights from some of the people that you got to talk to? The stories behind the scenes, things that they shared that maybe you found interesting, or a perspective people hadn't maybe heard before?
Yeah, well, one of the more interesting stories that stuck with me is that back when Pixar was still a small studio, they hadn't been bought by Disney yet. They hadn't even made their first feature, but they were trying to break out on the Oscar scene by submitting some of their shorts for consideration. And the process for getting nominated for a short, well, it can be complicated. There are three ways. You can win a Student Academy Award, you can win at a festival, you could win a special qualifying festival prize, or you can publicly display your short at a theater in a certain area for a certain number of days. And that's what Pixar tried to do in the early days. They would exhibit their shorts in a theater for X amount of days so they could qualify. But with 1 year, they completely blanked. They forgot to deliver the film to this theater that was going to play it. And it was over Thanksgiving weekend. And they were scrambling to get it there somehow. So pretty much everyone was out of town, but two of the animators who worked there, they managed to go back to the studio. But the thing was that it was locked in one of the desks, and they couldn't get in. They couldn't find the key to get the film. So they ran to this hardware store that was closing down. It was going to become a Circuit City, which tells you when this all happened. And they were asking, okay, we need a saw to break into this desk. And the clerk was all like, well, I have this used saw. And they're like, we'll take it. And the clerk was all like, okay. So they just started sawing through the desk to get it out there. And yeah, the first drawer they opened, it wasn't in there. But then they sawed through another door, and finally they got the film, and they got it there. And yes, I believe it was Luxo Jr. that ultimately got the nomination for them that year.
What a cool story. Yeah. So Pixar seems to have some of these lores of things with their films that are very, very interesting. So that's awesome. Let's just talk about, for people who haven't read the book, let's talk about volume 1 for a little bit. Let's talk about the different eras of animation at these award shows. Can you kind of break down that and talk a little bit more about those?
Yeah. Well, I guess if we're going by era, in the early days, if you wanted an animated feature to get nominated for anything at the Oscars, it would pretty much exclusively be in the audio categories. For Snow White, it only got nominated for its score, so they wound up giving Walt Disney a Special Achievement Oscar just to recognize it, even though it really should have been in the Best Picture conversation. And then Pinocchio would win a competitive Oscars really, for its score and When You Wish Upon a Star. And after that, it was pretty much just those two categories, along with Best Sound, where we might see animation recognized, along with Best Animated Short, of course. And it wasn't until Beauty and the Beast broke into Best Picture that we started to see more possibilities for animation at award shows. But that was almost 60 years, a nearly 60-year gap or so. And then only a few years after Beauty and the Beast, the original Toy Story, it got nominated for Best Original Screenplay, which is also a first for animation. So we did see some breakthroughs on that front, but there still wasn't quite enough. We still haven't seen an animated film get nominated for Best Director. And I interviewed the directors of Beauty and the Beast, And Kirk Wise said that the most common question that he gets is, what do animation directors do? And his answer is what a live action director does. We're just working in a different medium, but we're responsible for all the same things. And I don't think that people really understand that even years later. That's one of the reasons why we've never seen one nominated there. And there are plenty of other categories where animation has yet to break through, like best editing, cinematography, art direction. And that's why it's been increasingly hard to get it back into Best Picture. Hence why we got the Best Animated Feature category in the early 2000s, which a lot of people were divided about because some felt that we may never see another animated film nominated for Best Picture again, but where people have come to see that at least this is guaranteeing at least one animated film gets an Oscar every year, and 3 to 5 will be nominated overall. Which, yeah, and even if they hadn't created that category, I'm not entirely convinced that we would have seen a lot of films in the Best Picture race, given how it's going, at least not in the pre 10 era. And even in the era of 10 nominees, we haven't seen as many as we should.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It seems like the category kind of was created as there's all these movies coming up and they're getting pushback for some of them, obviously Beauty and the Beast being the most prominent one at the time. And it's like, okay, here's your category, go sit in the corner. So it has these two sides, like you talk about. There's the positive where it's finally it has entire category where these films can get recognized and actually on a bigger scale than maybe one every 5 years. But on the other side, do you feel that maybe it has biased the Academy a little bit where they, like you said, there's a slew of categories that animated films haven't been even nominated once because they don't acknowledge them in the same way as all the other films?
Yeah. Well, some people may say that they don't need a Best Picture award because they're going to get one automatically. Although a few years ago, we did see Parasite become the first international film to win Best Picture. And international films and animation are kind of the same because neither fall under a genre. It's a wide range of different stories you can tell. And if a film like Parasite can win there, it's not out of the question that animation could break through there. Although it helps that Parasite was a great ensemble piece. And voice acting is another facet of animation that we've yet to see recognized at the Oscars. And that might be the biggest reason. The actors branch makes up the biggest branch of the Academy. And they usually like to award performances where they can actually see your face, even though a lot of the Oscar-winning performances we see are actually covered under a lot of makeup. But apparently that's okay, but yeah, being covered by drawings is a different idea. But if you could see the actors branch get more on board with the animation, then maybe we'll see more break in. And, I read in a recent Variety article that almost 50% of Gen Zers prefer animation over live action. So perhaps the key is for the Academy to get more younger voters in there. And at that point, we may see animation break through at the Oscars in Best Picture.
You mentioned Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and how that really didn't get anything other than the honorary Oscar later. In early Hollywood, what do you think was the issue there with getting the nominations that they needed for these animated films?
Well, I think for one thing is that they didn't quite know how to recognize it because it was the first movie of its kind. They weren't sure if there was ever going to be another anything like it. And I also think it didn't help that Snow White, it got its general release at the very end of 1937. It was still expanding going into 1938, just when they were starting to mark their Oscar ballots. And for the one nomination that it did get, it was in scoring, but the scoring award was under an interesting rule at that point in time where pretty much one studio could get a film nominated in the best score category, which is why that particular year they had almost like 10. So Snow White almost automatically got nominated there. So I don't know if it was really on enough radars. And it took almost another year until they gave it the honorary Oscar, because by then it had become a phenomenon and they knew that they had slept on it and it needed to be recognized somehow. And so they had Shirley Temple present the honorary Oscar, which was an Oscar with 7 miniature ones to Walt Disney. And she said, "Oh, isn't it bright and shiny?" which is the name of the book. That's where I got the idea from.
Cute. So let's talk a little bit controversy. You mentioned, that, so Song of the South, I was going through that. So I was flipping through some things and found, and that section came up. I'm like, this is perfect. Cause that was another one where there was an honorary Oscar given to James Baskett first Black man to receive an Oscar. But then it also received the Oscar for Best Original Song, Zippity Doo-Dah. So this was later. This was in the late, mid to late 40s when this happened. And I liked that section of the book because you didn't gloss over it. You talked about the back and forth. You talked about the controversy that was happening with James attending the show and not, and different perspectives of people. Even I think Floyd Norman, right, was one of the quotes in there that you were discussing of his opinions on the film and its receiving. So that's one section that I thought was interesting because it's a controversial thing and it's not something you're going to shy away from. You're just going to talk about it and discuss it. So can you talk a little bit more about the controversy that happened with that?
Yeah. Well, I felt that I needed to get as many different opinions on that because as a white guy, I could only, bring so much of that perspective. So I got perspectives from animation historians who are both African American and also Caucasian. I got perspectives from people at the time, animators and historians who are, of mixed race, of various races now. So that was another place where I tried to be as unbiased as possible. And I do think that it is important to talk about Song of the South, though, because it is the film that Disney likes to pretend doesn't even exist. And to an extent, I see why, but I do think that it is important to talk about for its, historical impact. And also what holds up, what doesn't hold up.
It's by them trying to sweep this movie under the rug. And now even we see Zippity Doo-Dah, the song, is no longer allowed in the parks. It's erasing this history that was really important and really monumental for James Baskett, just to highlight these Black actors who had a key part in filmmaking history.
Yeah, when it comes to African Americans at the Oscars, even though James Baskett was the first actor of color to receive one, at least the first male actor to receive an Oscar for acting, it technically wasn't a competitive award. It was an honorary one. It wasn't until Sidney Poitier won one competitively. And while that should be viewed as the first competitive Oscar win for an African-American male actor, I do think that Baskett is a footnote that deserves more attention, especially since, as far as my research shows, no one really knows what happened to his Oscar after he died. And I even talked to some historians, and they weren't sure either. So it's one of those things that's just kind of gone with the wind.
So let's talk a little bit about the Emmys, because you mentioned the Emmys in here, and we're talking about the Academy Awards. Obviously, they're the biggest and kind of the most mainstream, if you will. But Flintstones was the first animated show nominated for Comedy Emmy. So let's talk a little bit more about the Emmys and animation's place over the years.
Yeah, Flintstones, it was the first to break in there, and at the time, they didn't have an animation category at the Emmys, and eventually they would create one for Outstanding Children's Program, which is generally where animation would be honored because there weren't a ton of animated programs that were being tailored just for adults or even airing in prime time after the Flintstones. There were a few, but it faded out really until The Simpsons brought it back. And then even then, The Simpsons was the gold standard that few others could compete with. There were some that rose up in the years that followed, like King of the Hill and South Park, but it really hasn't been until recent years where we've just seen this explosion of quality animation that can compete at the Primetime Emmys and has also expanded to the Children's and Family Emmys. And it's never been more interesting, although they do kind of seem set in nominating at least 2 or 3 of the same shows every year that they've been nominating for over a decade now, even though there are a lot of great new shows that don't always get the recognition they deserve. Although really, animation in general deserves more recognition at the Emmys, which is still exclusively at the Creative Arts ceremony. And they don't even have the category on the main telecast, even though there's plenty of room for Outstanding Reality Show.
Yeah. So talking about The Simpsons. So The Simpsons has won quite a few Emmys for Outstanding Animated Program, but it keeps getting overlooked for Best Comedy Series in that category. So what's your take on that? Is it similar to what's happening with animation at the Academy Awards, where it's kind of just falling into this bucket and that's good enough?
Well, not exactly, because the Emmys and Oscars operate differently. At the Oscars, an animated film can compete for Best Picture and Best Animated Feature, and they could theoretically get nominated for both. At the Emmys, they make you choose. If you're an animated program, you either have to submit in the animated program category, or you can switch to another category. If you're a dramatic animated show, you could submit as Best Drama. If you're a comedy animated show, you can submit it as a comedy, but you can only do one of those. And when they changed that rule, The Simpsons decided to submit as a comedy, but it didn't get nominated. So they submitted again the following year, and again, they didn't get nominated. And when you look at some of the stuff that they did nominate those years, like Mad About You, which no one remembers years later, it goes to show that if The Simpsons couldn't get nominated then, they're probably not going to get nominated now. So they decided to just give up, and they went back, with their tails between their legs to animation, and that's where they've been ever since. And that's was actually one of the writers' words, not mine, with the tail. But years later, Family Guy did submit as a comedy series, and it did get in, although there were a few, changes there since The Simpsons had come out. For one thing, they were operating under a blue panel system that particular year, which is where you get a select group of Emmy voters, and they select like the finalists to vote on, which is a little different now where it's open to a wider body. So Family Guy had fewer people to win over, and it also helped that year they expanded the race, because for many years it was just 5 comedy nominees, and that year there ended up being like 7 or so. And it also helped that Family Guy got nominated shortly after they had a writer's strike, so there were fewer comedies contending that year. And the following year, Glee came out, Modern Family came out, Nurse Jackie came out, so it was a much more competitive field, which might be why Family Guy couldn't get nominated in the following years. But Family Guy is still the only animated comedy series to get in there. And there have been a few others that have tried to submit. Archer submitted one year, but it couldn't get in. King of the Hill submitted one year and couldn't get in. South Park, despite winning in the animated program about 4 or 5 times, has never tried to submit as a comedy, although with this most recent season getting a lot of buzz, I actually think South Park could submit as a comedy series, but it still might not get in because it's an animated show, and they just might write it off because of that.
Talking about certain films or TV shows getting the shaft, one thing that I have always been very disappointed is Beauty and the Beast not winning Best Picture. Now, I know the reasons for Silence of the Lambs winning, but I think that's an interesting section of the book because that was very novel at the time for it to be nominated for that. And can you talk about the history of that film and how it kind of shaped these categories?
Well, there are several things that contributed to Beauty and the Beast getting nominated. For one thing, it had a premiere at the New York Film Festival. It was unfinished and it erupted in applause, and they figured that if they could win over that crowd, that they could win over the Academy as well, and they did. And at the time, Beauty and the Beast almost felt like the culmination of everything Disney had been working towards. They had made a comeback with Roger Rabbit and The Little Mermaid a few years earlier, and Beauty and the Beast was getting some of the best reviews since the original Snow White, and they figured, well, if this can't get nominated, nothing else will, and it did get nominated. And if you look at the Best Picture lineup that year, the Academy did make some bold choices. Even though my vote also would have been for Beauty and the Beast, it went to Silence of the Lambs, which was pretty much the first horror film to win in that category, and is still among the select few horror films that they've actually embraced in that category. So they were stepping out of their comfort zone that year. And it also helped that with the passing of Howard Ashman, I feel like Beauty and the Beast was resonating with people a lot, both in terms of the film itself, but also the behind-the-scenes story. Howard Ashman had thrown his heart into finishing that film, even though he never got to see the finished product. It really pulled at the heartstrings, and it did lead to 2 of the most touching speeches that night, when it won Best Score for Alan Menken, and when Menken and his late partner got to accept on his behalf. So, yeah, that speech in particular really never fails to bring the waterworks every time you rewatch it.
Definitely an important, pivotal moment for animation. So, okay, you mentioned the different breakdowns of. So the first volume goes till about, you said Lion King, early 90s, and then volume 2 is from mid 90s through 2008, Wall-E, right? And then volume 3 is 2009 till Flow, which is 2025.
Yeah.
What big changes have you noticed between those 3 eras?
Well, for one thing, in the first era, you'll find that it's almost entirely dominated by Disney. There are plenty of other animation studios who are doing quality work like Warner Brothers, MGM, and while some of them would get recognized at the Oscars, Disney was largely dominant. Disney won the most Oscars in the animated short category, and when it came to features, Disney was pretty much the only player. A couple broke through, like the Fleischers got a couple nominations with Gulliver's Travels. The first Charlie Brown movie, A Boy Named Charlie Brown, actually got nominated for its score. But if you look at all the nominations for animation between the 1940s and the 90s, they were almost all exclusively Disney. And that's one of the reasons why they held off on doing an animation category. June Foray pushed for years to do it, but they would say, June, there's only one studio. And in Volume 2, we see that there is more than one studio that can contend there. We saw the rise of DreamWorks. Pixar broke out, which is also technically Disney, but also not Disney. There was more foreign animation coming in from Hayao Miyazaki, and also on television, which we get a lot more into in Volume 2. There was so much more variety from Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, primetime animation, the rise of anime. People were seeing that it wasn't just Disney, and Disney themselves were still doing pretty good for themselves, even if they did kind of go through a dark period there. And in Volume 3, really, it's never been more varied. And I think never before have more people realized that animation isn't just for kids. It's not a genre. And while there will always be naysayers, I do slowly but surely think that the tides are beginning to change. Not nearly fast enough, and maybe not in our lifetime, but I do think that we may actually get to the point where we will see an animated film win Best Picture, even if it might not be until Bright and Shiny Volume 6.
One thing I like about the book is that you're not just focusing on like the big award, Best Picture, Best Animated Picture. It's all the awards that the films win. And so one interesting one, like you said, you were able to talk to Stephen Schwartz and Alan Menken, is music. And that's one that for a period of time, Disney really dominated the Best Original Score, Best Original Song. Talk about that and maybe that era of domination and just music and animation at these award shows.
Yeah, well, it really started with The Little Mermaid winning for its score in Under the Sea. And at the time, that was the first competitive win for an animated film since, let's see, I want to say, I'm trying to think. I guess you could count Song of the South, Mary Poppins, but they were technically hybrid films. They didn't entirely count. You'd have to go back even further to when, Dumbo and Pinocchio came out in the 40s. And that just saw Disney really dominate in those categories. They won again for Beauty and the Beast, followed by Lion King, and then Pocahontas. And they were kind of undefeated to the point that they had a Best Musical or Comedy score for a while. And eventually that retired and they went back to one scoring category. But it just goes to show that Disney was dominant in those categories during the 90s, which has changed in recent years because Disney just didn't do as many musicals as they used to. And even what they did, some really caught on, like Frozen, while others just didn't take off like they did in the 90s. But who knows, maybe this year we'll see K-pop Demon Hunters, which is just Disney, but animation, it could win Best Original Song for Golden.
Yeah, it seems like there's quite a few different songs that they could be nominated for. We've definitely seen Disney and other studios where they have 2 or 3 that are in contention. So that'll be interesting to see. So let's talk about the third category. And this really one is very specific to animation, which is the Annie Awards. And can you talk about the history of the Annie Awards and how that's maybe changed or developed over the years?
Yeah, well, it came out in the 70s. People like Walt Disney had died. Let's see, the Fleischers were down by one brother, and June Foray felt that at this point in time, we should really have an award that recognizes the animation legends who never got their due. So they honored the Fleischers the first year, and then the following year it was Walter Lantz who did Woody Woodpecker, and after that they did the Termite Terrace Crew, and for many years, about 2 decades, the Annies were exclusively a Lifetime Achievement Award. Occasionally they would give a shout out to a more recent animated film, but since this was the 70s and the 80s, there weren't quite as many animated features coming out, and the ones that did weren't always breaking new ground. There was Ralph Bakshi, who was taking animation in bold new places, and also Don Bluth during the late 80s when he started bringing back a lot of the animation traditions that had kind of died out with Walt. But there weren't really a ton of new kids on the block who were getting an opportunity, at least not in mainstream animation. And it was around the 90s where they said, what if we had a competitive award where we could have best animated feature, best animated TV show, best animated commercial? And there had been discussions about that even going back to the first Annie Awards, but it never quite materialized. Some people were against that. They wanted to keep it exclusively a Lifetime Achievement Award, which is now called the Winsor McKay Award, which honors what many consider the OG animator, or at least the one who made animation the trade that it is. And since the 90s, the Annies have also been a competitive award while still giving out the Winsor McKay Award. And they've expanded too. They have a lot more categories. And even though they've never been on TV, at least not in a huge commercial sense, more people are recognizing that it is probably the highest award that you can get in the animation community because it is one that's exclusively from your peers. But the Oscars, the animation branch votes on it, but then the entire Academy will cast their vote, whereas with the Annies, it's all animation professionals.
Yeah, speaking of the Winsor McKay Award, this year's recipient was Aaron Blaise, who is known for a lot of his animal animation at Disney and his recent work, Snow Bear. We just interviewed him and then reviewed the film on the podcast. And so it's really interesting that it's coming full circle now. And we'll see how Snow Bear does at the upcoming Academy Awards. If it's nominated, I have a feeling it probably will because it's won quite a few awards. Have you seen it?
I haven't had a chance yet, but it's definitely been on my radar along with several other shorts. I recently saw Eru from Cartoon Saloon, which is a great short. It could also be nominated. And what's interesting is that Snow Bear, it's eligible for the Oscars. What they're going to do is they're going to come out in December with a short list of 15 potential nominees. And from there, they're going to vote on 5. And, it would be great to see Snow Bear in there. Although in recent years, even though Snow Bear isn't a Disney film, it was surprising when they didn't nominate Once Upon a Studio, although they may have seen that as too commercial, where I don't think that will be the same problem with Snow Bear, so it does stand a very good chance at getting into the final 5.
Yeah. Let's talk about animated shorts, because that's another category that came around.
Yeah, it was the 5th Academy Awards that they introduced the Best Cartoon Oscar, cartoon short subject, before they started calling it animated short. And when they introduced it, they also introduced other short form awards like live action short and also documentary, but this was mainly a way because the Academy really wanted to honor Walt Disney in some way. Steamboat Willie had come out a few years earlier, Mickey Mouse was becoming a cultural icon, but there was nowhere to recognize it. So they basically created this award so they could honor a Walt, which was evident in that year's lineup, where the winner was Flowers and Trees, which was not only the first animated film to win an Oscar, but also the first in full Technicolor to win an Oscar. The other nominees were Mickey's Orphans, which was also Disney, and then the Warner Brothers short, It's Got Me Again, so basically, Walt had a pretty good chance of winning that year, but even on the off chance that he didn't win animated short, they also gave him an honorary Oscar that year for the creation of Mickey Mouse, so he was guaranteed to get up on stage that night. And then for the next 7 years or so, Walt Disney won every year, and it wasn't until he started back out of the race because he was starting to focus more on features, and that they finally gave it to MGM for the Milky Way. And after that, it wasn't long until Tom and Jerry just started sweeping. So, yeah, the Oscars just love their sweeps. But it's interesting. When the studio system started to die down, theatrical cartoons, they just kind of disappeared as we know it. They still exist now to an extent, but certainly not to the same extent they did. But the best animated short category survived thanks to independent animators like John Hubley and Faith Hubley, who were still making animated shorts that were eligible for the Oscars. And at multiple points, the Oscars considered getting rid of the short categories, but people like June Foray and Bill Littlejohn, who was another animation legend, stood up saying that we need to preserve these categories because that they can be a gateway for independent animators, student animators to get recognition. So they've remained there ever since, although it's remained a fight just to keep some of these short form categories on the Oscar telecast. And a lot of people shrug them off saying, no one cares about them. Like, well, they would care if they had a chance to actually watch a lot of these shorts, because even though it is becoming easier to watch a lot of nominated shorts, they'll sometimes be screened together as a package. Yeah, I do think it would be great if they could be put on YouTube for for like free for like a week leading up to the Oscars, just so everyone can see all of them. And then they would really get invested in seeing some of these wins instead of going to the bathroom because they haven't seen any of the nominees.
Right. Yeah, that is the nice thing about locally here is that you're able to watch the both live action shorts and the animated shorts. You can go to a theater here and check them all out, which, like you said, it helps you get invested in the winner. And it's a great pipeline for future directors for features. So for both the live action and animation.
Yeah.
So is there a film that you feel was totally snubbed, like should have won either, in any category, whether it's best picture, best animated feature, that like stands out to you as, man, this one really didn't deserve that?
Yeah, well, there are plenty of winners I would have given to. I always felt that Wreck-It Ralph, that's the one I always felt should have won in 2012. And as much as I love Flo, I think I like The Wild Robot just a little more. And even though it was great seeing Gintz up there, it might have been just a little more gratifying to see Chris Sanders up there. But we are kind of splitting hairs because you couldn't really go along with that lineup. Even if I also loved Memoir from a Snail that year. Would have been great to see Adam Elliott get up on that stage. And, in the short category, one that I was really surprised didn't get nominated, it was this Student Academy Award-winning short called In a Heartbeat. It went viral almost a decade ago. Everyone thought it would definitely get nominated, and then it didn't, so that was also really shocking. Weirdly enough, I think I see even more snubs in the animated short category than in animated feature, and I think part of that's because with animated feature, we usually know what's going to get nominated. We narrow it down to maybe a list of 7 that can maybe get in. I think last year everyone knew what the 5 were going to be, and with the way this year is going, I feel like we're also going to know, but in the short category, that's really where we see some shocking admissions. Like I already mentioned Once Upon a Studio, which a lot of people thought would be a lock a few years ago, but the Academy just didn't go for it that year. So yeah, there are plenty that I would love to see nominated in Best Picture that didn't. Going back to the original Shrek, Toy Story, Finding Nemo, so many Pixar films, so many Disney films, so many Ghibli films that should have been up for Best Picture, but just weren't.
Yeah, it's interesting that the landscape for animated shorts has changed, at least with the bigger studios. It seems Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks to an extent, for the longest time, they would use these shorts as a pipeline for their upcoming directors or, leaders, and then they'd release them theatrically. And now, since the era of the streaming services, they don't. It's very rare that one of their features is going to have a short in front of it. And so I feel like that pipeline has really died off for those big studios. And it's allowed more independent animators and student animators and different studios to kind of come in recent years, just because Disney and Pixar's kind of dropped that baton a little bit, which I find interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Although Disney and Pixar, they are still technically doing shorts, but what they'll usually do is they'll drop it on Disney Plus, but then they'll play it in a theater in California for maybe a week so it can qualify, and then maybe it can get nominated. Like I think that's what they're doing with one short this year called Vera. I haven't had a chance to see it yet, but I'm sure it's going to be great. But in terms of theatrical shorts, it's worth noting that Cartoon Saloon's Eru is going to play in front of Little Amelie, which is a G-Kids film coming out. So hopefully that can get more people to put shorts back in front of animated features or just in front of features. Nancy Beeman, who was a Disney animator, mentioned that at a lot of Academy screenings, what they should do is play a nominated animated short or just a short in general that's nominated in front of one of the features that's been nominated for Best Picture that's in contention. That way, more Academy voters would see the shorts and be more compelled to vote for them. Because if you look at a lot of these anonymous Oscar ballots, a lot of people will say, I didn't watch any of the shorts, so I abstain. So really, you only need to win over a select few to really win that Oscar. Although if more people saw the shorts and we're guaranteed to see them by having them at screenings for features, then who knows?
So with big hits like Arcane and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Wild Robot Flow, right? They're gaining a lot of traction over the years. And I feel like animation's really, like we've been talking about, it's had its heyday. It's just really a lot more mainstream, a lot more accepted. Do you see animation breaking more barriers when it comes to some of these other categories? Do you think this is going to be it's going to stay status quo, be more common, less common?
Yeah, who knows? Like, it would be great to see an animated film finally get in for art direction, which isn't out of the question, but if it didn't happen for something like Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, then when is it going to happen? It'd also be great to see it break through in Best Director, but again, if they couldn't get Hayao Miyazaki in there for The Boy and the Heron, even as like a Lifetime Achievement nomination, when is that going to
Yeah.
happen? So I don't really know if I see it happening anytime soon, although I could see it getting back into Best Picture if it has enough below the line support in
Yeah.
categories like if it could get nominated for its music, screenplay, sound, and also in international animated feature. We saw Flow also nominated there, which was, even though it didn't win that year, it was a huge victory just to be in there because the only two other international animated films that have been nominated in that category were Flea and Waltz with Bashir. So that's one category where we could see more of a breakthrough.
So, what's your prediction for the 2026 award show season for animation?
Yeah, well, as of right now, everyone is predicting K-pop Demon Hunters to win Best Animated Feature, and even though it definitely is the front runner as of right now, keep in mind that at this time last year, people had gone from saying that Inside Out 2 is absolutely going to win to The Wild Robot is absolutely going to win, and they'll Flow won the Golden Globe, and from there everyone said, well, I'm not entirely sure, and then Flow ultimately won, so we could see something happen this year too like that. Two of the big films to watch out for are Arco, which is being distributed through Neon, and Little Amelie, which is being distributed through DG Kids. They could be the little movies that could, although it's going to be hard to say until they come out whether or not they click with audiences and critics groups and awards bodies like Flow did. But I do think those two are safer nominations. And as for the two final slots, as of now, I'm going with Zootopia 2 and the new Netflix movie from Alex Wu, In Your Dreams. Although, since we haven't seen either of those films yet, we don't know what the response is going to be. I expect that Zootopia 2, if it's anywhere near as good as the original, or even if it is a step down, it would probably still be good enough to get the nomination, especially if it does have another timely message that people are going to connect with. And I'm sure it's going to make $1 billion, which always helps. And In Your Dreams, that's also from Netflix. It could be, the unexpected hit over the holiday season. So those two are on my radar. There's also an anime film coming out called Scarlet, which could also potentially break through. But I think that those seem like our 5 contenders, although something could change between now and the next 2 months where we have more of a consensus. But don't be surprised if those are the 5 you keep hearing on the awards secret throughout the year. And in terms of other nominations, K-pop Demon Hunters, as of right now, they're only campaigning Golden for the Best Song Oscar, which makes sense. It's the big breakthrough, and having another in there could cancel votes. So I think that's absolutely going to get nominated for Best Original Song. And its biggest competition will probably be Wicked, because that's going to have 2 new songs. And we haven't heard those in full, but if they can compete with something like Defying Gravity, maybe Stephen Schwartz can win a 3rd Oscar after Pocahontas and Prince of Egypt. And I kind of feel like that's going to be it for animation this year, sadly. I don't really see it breaking into a ton of other categories, although if K-pop Demon Hunters keeps gaining traction, it could get into maybe Best Score. It could maybe even get a surprise sound nomination. I wrote an article on my website, Cartoon Contender, contemplating whether or not K-pop Demon Hunters could get into Best Picture, and it's highly unlikely because the competition is getting more and more stacked this year, even from Netflix. They've got Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein coming out. They got Jay Kelly coming out, a film called Train Dreams, which has been really well received. But if none of those films quite land as they are hoping, well, what would need to happen for K-pop Demon Hunters to get a nomination is look at the Golden Globes. If K-pop Demon Hunters can not only get a Best Picture, not only get a Best Animated Feature nomination, but also get into Best Picture Musical or Comedy at the Golden Globes, like Beauty and the Beast did back in the day, maybe it could translate into an Oscar nomination for Best Picture. You also want to look out for the PGA nominations. That's for producers. If K-pop Demon Hunters got a Best Picture nomination at Producers Guild, which hasn't happened since Toy Story 3, then it could be a serious contender for Best Picture. If that doesn't happen, then it's just going to be lucky to be nominated. So a very, very, very slim chance, but it is worth considering every possible option.
Awesome. So is there any highlight from writing the book, that as you were doing this experience of interviewing all these animation greats over the years and compiling it and all these stories? Is there any big thing that stands out to you?
Yeah, well, there were a lot of things that stood out. It's hard to single one, but I do think that interviewing Floyd Norman, he was probably my favorite interview overall because he's probably been around the longest of all the people that I interviewed. And, he could call all the way back to Mary Poppins. And when he first heard, Feed the Birds. And he also probably had the best general idea about what the Oscars is. And he says, on one hand, it is very superficial and there are a lot more important things. But when you are walking that red carpet, you do realize that you are in a very important place. And I think that does best sum up the Oscars, where it's easy to write off and say, awards aren't anything. The Oscars are biased. But when you are on that red carpet and you are hearing your name read off, and maybe even on the stage accepting Oscar, you do realize that it is very significant, and to an extent it is important. Not the most important thing in the world, but still something that is, more important than some people will have you believe. And that is why I do hope one day we will see an animated film win Best Picture.
Here's hoping. One day it will happen. Thank you so much. This has been awesome talking about these books with you. Just a reminder, the book is called Bright and Shiny, The History of Animation at Award Shows. There's volume 1, volume 2 are available now. Volume 3 is coming soon. Where would you like people to go find them? Anywhere great books are sold, or do you have a specific place we want to send them?
Yeah, anywhere where books are sold, although we're selling through Amazon. You can get it through barnesandnoble.com. You can get it through my publisher, bearmanormedia.com. And if you want to learn more about the books, you can visit my website, cartooncontender.com. And you can follow me as Nick Spake or Cartoon Contender on all social media, Facebook, Twitter, as it was formerly known, Threads, Letterboxd. You can find me there. And that's about it.
So what's next for you after finishing volume 3? What's next?
What's next is, I'm going to be mainly focusing on my work at Cartoon Contender, where I'll be focusing on animation at award shows year-round, breaking down Oscar races, Emmy races, doing interviews with industry professionals. So in a way, I created this website because I just didn't feel like I was done even after writing these books. And I wanted to keep the conversation going and also potentially keep an archive of animation at award shows that I can go back to if I do ever decide to write volume 4.
Awesome. Perfect. So you are all in, clearly, animation at award shows. You are continuing your work, so be sure to go there. I'll include a link to all of these places down in the show notes. All right, thanks so much to Nick for joining us for this episode of the Animation Addicts Podcast. And until next time, see you later.
That's all, folks.
You've been listening to the Animation Addicts Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want to help spread the word, be sure to share the podcast with your friends on social media. Just don't forget to tag us at Rotoscopers on Instagram and use the hashtag Animation Addicts. For all the links and full show notes for this episode, go to rotoscopers.com/podcast. Now, if you still can't get enough for your animation fix, be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and visit rotoscopers.com for more animation news, reviews, and interviews. Thanks for listening.
The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in more places that could expose you more to identity theft. But LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, our US-based restoration specialists will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Don't face drained accounts, fraudulent loans, or financial losses alone. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Kay Jewelers' early Black Friday sale is happening now. Get up to 50% off Black Friday deals and up to 40% off everything else. Don't miss this sale. Start your season with savings, only at Kay. Exclusions apply. See Kay.com/exclusions for details.